This is BBC World News Today with me, Zeinab Badawi. The bloodiest day yet in 5 weeks of anti-government demonstrations in Syria. Opposition sources say 49 people were killed as security forces opened fire on protesters in towns and cities across the country. The rebels back in control in Misrata after some of the fiercest clashes in the conflict in Libya so far, but America's top soldier still says Libya is moving towards an impasse.
Essentially, it is very much stalemate-like in the vicinity of Ajumogobia and Brega.
Tension in a Tibetan region of China after the death of a monk in a protest against government policies. The Vatican marks Good Friday with the first ever televised question and answer session with the Pope. What did viewers want to ask him? And with a week to go to Britain's royal wedding, we'll look at who will be the financial winners and losers from the occasion. Hello and welcome. Every Friday for the past few weeks, anti-government protesters have marched in several cities in Syria, and each time they've been met with a heavy response by security forces. Well, this was the bloodiest Friday yet, with opposition supporters saying they were fired on indiscriminately with live bullets. The latest reports from them claim that 49 people were killed. Our correspondents have not been allowed to enter the country, so Owen Bennett-Jones reports from neighbouring Lebanon.
Unverified video footage from a Damascus suburb today. Just one of many incidents leaving dead and injured in the streets. The protests have involved large numbers of people in towns and cities across the country. On Thursday, the government lifted the emergency law, and now the people have given their reply. They have more demands, ranging from the release of political prisoners to the introduction of multi-party politics.
We're not scared anymore to go out and talk. This week the number of protesters this week is much bigger than the number of protesters last week, and week by week the number of protesters is increasing. So that's the thing that's making us happy. But we believe that we still have such a long way to get our freedom.
These young men in Hama are trying to dodge the bullets by hiding behind trash cans. With Syria such a key player in the Middle East, the consequences could reverberate throughout the region. The government may have hoped that by lifting the emergency law it would have done enough to stop the protests, but the demonstrators have kept on going onto the streets, leaving the government now using force to try to stop them.
That was Owen Bennett-Jones, and the British Foreign Secretary William Hague has actually issued a statement condemning the violence in Syria. He said he's extremely concerned by the reports of deaths and casualties across the country, and he says he condemns the unacceptable killing of demonstrators by the Syrian security forces, calling on them to exercise restraint instead of repression. And he says that the Syrian authorities, the government, should address the legitimate demands of the Syrian people. Political reforms should be brought forward and implemented without delay. So some fairly strong words there from the British government on the continuing protests in Syria. And Owen Bennett-Jones can now join us live from Beirut, where he's been monitoring developments in the country. So, Owen, do you think that these protests kind of mark a step change in terms of the pressure that it's putting on Bashar al-Assad in terms of the numbers and also the breadth of the protests?
Well, a step change for both sides, I think. I mean, this was a day after the government had made it clear it didn't want protests, and people came out despite that in ever greater numbers. And then also a step change for the government, which, having made this concession of lifting the emergency law, then went one stage in the opposite direction, basically, and started shooting in the streets. So definitely an escalation from both sides and a standoff now between the two of them.
And the government keeps on depicting these protests, Owen, doesn't it, as Islamists wanting to bring down the government. That's a well-used card, isn't it?
Well, it has used that card a week ago. I haven't heard much of it recently, but it constantly says, it's confused. The government is confused. It says they're Islamists, it says they are armed gangs, and then it says they have legitimate demands which must be addressed. So there is, a lack of clarity from the government as to exactly what attitude it's taking to these protesters, and then away from the words and the statements and the things that come out in the official news agency, the reality on the streets, over 40 people dead today.
And you heard what William Hague has been saying. I mean, there now is a concern that these protests are perhaps getting somewhat out of hand. How many worries are there that the instability could perhaps spread to Lebanon and trigger off tensions, perhaps even with Israel?
Well, there are regional implications to this because, if there is upheaval in Syria, that has implications for Hezbollah here, Israel's most effective enemy, and Israel may see that as an opportunity. Who knows? There are lots of ways this could play out if the Syrian government is in some way incapacitated for some weeks and months. So people throughout this part of the world are watching very closely what's happening in Syria. Obviously, the main people affected are the people on the streets, but it does have implications for capitals around here.
Owen, thanks very much. Owen Bennett-Jones there in Beirut. Now, the seesaw in battles between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces in Libya has been a particular feature of the conflict there. Well, now the country's third biggest city, Misrata, has seen the retreat of Gaddafi's forces, who'd been pounding the besieged civilians there for weeks, leaving many dead and wounded. Misrata is significant. It has a port area and it's the only city in western Libya to be largely controlled by the rebels. Ola Girian is one of the few Western journalists inside Misrata and has sent this report.
Free to walk their own streets. Now Colonel Gaddafi's forces are gone. The rebels fought long and hard here. They told us they lost 100 men just to capture one devastated district. But the rebels had a key target here. Omar took me to see it. This office block where insurance was sold before snipers moved in.
This building is the highest building in this area, in downtown.
So the snipers were killing people from here?
Yeah, kill me so easily. They get people so easily because it's the highest building and you can see all this area and downtown, all downtown, uptown too.
So how good does it feel to be able to stand here now?
So happy because my brother get shot from this building. That's why I'm so happy.
His brother Ali was one of many killed by the snipers. Now, here at least, that danger is gone. Well, local people are back out on the street now, both rebels and civilians alike, checking the very heavy damage that's been done. And there's plenty of evidence here of the kind of fierce fighting that took place. The rebels were kept out of this area for 25 days. They lost a lot of men retaking this ground, but now they're back in control here. They say they intend to push on. For the young, a glimpse of new realities. But many children from this area have already seen far too much. Like the orphans who lived on the front line, 100 children, the youngest just 5 months old, who were trapped in a basement for days. They've been moved to a safer location, but staff say they've brought their trauma with them, and here too they are afraid. We met Rami, who wants to be a doctor, 10 years old, and trying to console the younger ones.
When we hear bombing, they feel frightened. I tell them it's military training. They fall asleep, but wake up when they hear more bombs. Then I tell them the truth.
Today brought hope for some and a return to their neighbourhood. Here it was time to douse the flames, but the fighting isn't over. It has just moved a few blocks. Orla Girian, BBC News, Misrata.
And the head of the American Armed Forces, Admiral Mike Mullen, has said coalition airstrikes against Libyan ground troops have reduced the capability of Gaddafi's forces by 30 to 40%, but he said military operations in Libya were moving towards an impasse.
Not surprisingly, the regime forces have changed their tactics and changed it in a way where they essentially look like the opposition forces. So it's become a much more difficult fight, much more difficult targets. As I've observed in recent days, essentially it is very much stalemate-like in the vicinity of Ajumogobia and Brega.
Admiral Mike Mullen there. Well, joining us now from Washington is Josh Rogin from the influential Foreign Policy magazine there. Josh Rogin, so we've got these unmanned drones, armed drones that the US now says it's going to be using over Libya. We've had John McCain also visiting the rebels in Benghazi. This is going to worry some people with those two words, mission creep.
Well, mission creep is a very loaded term, but what it basically means is that what we were defining as the mission is now spilling over into other activities, and of course that's exactly what's happening. What the Obama administration would explain, or what they would argue, is simply that if you define the mission broadly as the protection of civilians, then actions such as adding Predator drone strikes falls within that mission, and therefore there's no change. And they're free to make that argument, but the people on the ground see a different story. They see an increased U.S. involvement, an increased commitment of U.S. assets and military assets. In a sense, the Predator drones are more appropriate for the current fight in the sense they are more precise than large bombs coming from big planes. But the creep is ongoing, that's clear.
And Senator John McCain, what's he doing there then?
Well, Senator John McCain has a very specific agenda. He wants to collect from the Libyan Transitional Council what their list of needs and wants are, and then take that back to the Congress and try to convince the Congress to provide those needs and wants, often above the objections of the Obama administration and the White House. Senator McCain has been very clear. He believes that U.S. leadership in this mission is needed, is the most effective way to achieve the objective. He also views the objective as removing Gaddafi from power. Everybody knows how the administration is trying to square that circle by defining that as the goal but not the objective. And John McCain is there to make the point that the U.S. should be in the lead and that the international community should not prosecute this mission in any half measure and should take the fight all the way to Tripoli. That's his goal, and that's what he'll be pushing.
But it's going to be tough for them to meet those objectives, with Mike Mullen saying military operations moving towards an impasse. I mean, we are pretty much looking at the de facto division of Libya, aren't we? The east in the hands of the rebels and the west largely controlled by Gaddafi.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, there is nobody in this situation that believes that a de facto separation of Libya into two separate semi-autonomous regions is an outcome that's desirable. It's an untenable situation. It will require only the increased involvement of international and U.S. forces over the long term, and it's simply not an acceptable outcome for anybody. So while Mike Mullen and Robert Gates are just being simply honest in what they see as the situation on the ground, that doesn't mean that they're in favor of that outcome. In fact, they're pushing very strongly inside the administration for a policy that can achieve an outcome one way or the other, but the White House has not come around to the decision about changing the policy to move in that direction, and that's the biggest problem inside the Obama administration today.
Josh Rogin in Washington, thanks very much. Now let's take a look at some of the day's other main news. And France is considering suspending the treaty that allows people to travel without border controls through much of Europe. It's accused Italy of abusing the Schengen Agreement in connection with an influx of migrants coming through that country from Tunisia and Libya. Earlier this week, France refused to allow a number of trains across its border with Italy. And French police investigating the mysterious murder of 5 members of the same family buried in their own backyard say they now have new information about the murder suspect. The bank card belonging to the father of the family, whom detectives are hunting in relation to the deaths, was used in southern France last week. Toyota says global car production will not return to normal until the end of the year after being cut back due to the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. At the moment, plants in the country are running at half capacity. The company says that aftershocks from the earthquake have also hampered progress. Tibetan exile groups have released video footage which they say shows a young monk who burnt himself to death last month in a protest against the Beijing government. It's claimed the footage also shows a subsequent security build-up. China admits that a young monk died and that there were clashes, but denies blockading the monastery. Damien Grammaticus has this report, and you may find parts of it disturbing.
They're armed Chinese special police units. Tibetan exile groups say this is the crackdown that's been happening at the Kirti monastery in Sichuan. They say the footage was shot 4 weeks ago and smuggled out. The BBC cannot independently confirm where and when it was taken, but in the film you see a man being led towards a building by men with guns. He appears to have been detained. Tibetan exiles say the huge security deployment came after this 20-year-old monk Phuntsog set himself on fire in a protest against China's government. China has admitted the self-immolation happened and Phuntsog then died. The film shows what then appear to be checkpoints. China's state media has confirmed that in more recent days there were clashes, blaming Buddhist monks for stirring up trouble. Tibetan groups say Chinese security wanted to take the monks away for patriotic re-education, and locals moved to stop them. China's government this week denied that police then blockaded the monastery, with up to 2,500 monks inside.
As to our information, living and religious activities in Kirti Monastery are normal, and the social order in the area is normal. The monastery has enough supplies. Kirti's administration has established a joint patrol with the police to stop unknown people entering the monastery. Relations between the police and the monastery are good.
More footage released by the Tibetan exiles claims to show Phuntsog's cremation attended by large numbers of monks. Tibet's exiled spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, has said he fears the standoff between the police and the monks could become explosive. He urged both local Tibetans and China's government to show restraint. China, though, views him as the instigator of most of the unrest. Last week, the United States government said it was concerned about the situation at the monastery. It said the restrictions on monks and local people were onerous and were inconsistent with internationally recognised principles of human rights and freedom of religion. China's response was to say that the US should stop making irresponsible statements and respect facts. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Beijing.
The presidential elections in Nigeria last Saturday were pronounced by international observers as the best in the country's recent history. Well, subsequent events may yet force them to eat their words. The incumbent Goodluck Jonathan from the ruling PDP and a Christian southerner won the vote in 21 of the country's 36 states, defeating his closest Muslim opponent, Muhammadu Buhari, from the mostly Muslim north. Well, in the north, there's been a violent reaction to those results, with dozens, possibly hundreds, killed and tens of thousands more forced to flee their homes. Despite this, the government says next week state elections will go ahead largely as planned, but the violence has conjured up yet again the spectre of civil war. Well, joining us now here in the studio is Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Odein Ajumogobia. Foreign Minister, so it looks like Nigeria is quite clearly divided. Goodluck Jonathan wins the south, but Buhari wins most of the north. Only one state, I think, went to Goodluck Jonathan. Your country is very, very much divided along regional lines as well as religious lines.
I don't agree with you. If you look at the election and if you look at the violence, I think it indicates that the division is more along party lines. The violence is targeted against members of the People's Democratic Party, symbols of the party, officials, ministers, high officials of the party and of the government are being targeted. Some of the people who are being targeted are Muslims. So it's not a.
But isn't that to do with the fact that when Goodluck Jonathan won his party's nomination, there were those influential people and supporters in the party who said, actually, it should be a northerner who stands as our candidate, and Goodluck Jonathan won the presidential primaries, and this is a legacy of this discontent.
Well, he wouldn't have been a candidate of the party if he hadn't been through a primary of the party, which was, again, transparent, open, and he won overwhelmingly within the party.
OK, but right, looking at not at the divisions within the party or as I said, dissatisfaction amongst some of those who wanted to see a northern candidate stand as their presidential candidate, Muhammadu Buhari has said he doesn't accept the results. He's dissociated himself from the violence, but he hasn't actually openly condemned it. So what are the authorities going to do to try to make sure that these protests don't continue?
Well, I'm happy that he has condemned it. He has come out and condemned it. He came out, I think, 2 days after it started and eventually sort of asked for calm. He is a former head of state, and that's what you'd expect of a former head of state.
Well, he only dissociated himself from the violence. He didn't sort of completely and utterly say, stop it. But anyway, carry on.
Yes, well, I think that, you know, if you look back, all the election monitors said, as you said, said it was free and fair. I only could monitor in my own little constituency where I voted. But interestingly, all the presidential candidates and the National Assembly candidates in the election before, all came out and said this was free and fair. They all commended INEC for a job well done. Now, you can't accept a process and not accept the outcome of the process.
All right. Now, Goodluck Jonathan has got his own mandate, having been caretaker president. He is the first president, I believe, from Nigeria to come from the oil-rich region of the Niger Delta, as you yourself do. And a lot of poverty there, of course, and a lot of discontent in Nigeria about corruption. And people are saying, well, look, the jury's still out, but actually, so far, Goodluck Jonathan, you haven't really proved yourself to be a bit of a reformist like that. It's kind of been business as usual with you. He's got to make sure that poverty is tackled as well as corruption.
Well, he now has a clear mandate of the Nigerian people. 60% of the Nigerian people voted for him in this election. Our rules, democracy is not just about, casting a ballot. It's also about the rule of law. It's also about due process. It's also about following the rules if you're dissatisfied with the outcome. And I think the violence is a reflection in part of the need for greater enlightenment in the population, in some parts of the country perhaps more than others. You have a lot of unemployment. You have a lot of frustration, young people. It's a very young population. And when you have that sort of, that's a brew for the sort of violence that you're seeing, especially when you don't have the sort of enlightenment that I'm talking about. Riots by themselves don't undermine the election. So I have to completely disagree that anyone would eat their words. I just can't see that.
All right, OK. Well, you've got a big task ahead of you, this new government in Nigeria. Foreign Minister of Nigeria, Odein Ajumogobia, thanks very much indeed for coming into the studio. Now, it is Good Friday today, one of the holiest days in the Christian calendar, marking the day that Jesus Christ was crucified. Well, it's the day that the Pope has chosen to broadcast on television his first ever question and answer session, inviting questions from around the world on a range of topics. Duncan Kennedy has this report from Rome.
The Pope on primetime television, but as he's never been seen before, taking part in a discussion programme complete with audience, presenter and members of the public from around the world putting the questions. Pope Benedict looked frail but relaxed as the first came from 7-year-old Elena, direct from Japan. She was caught up in the recent earthquake and wanted to know why children there had to suffer.
I also have the same questions. Why do you have to suffer so much? We do not have the answers, but we know Jesus suffered like you.
L'anima di questo mio figlio Francesco.
Pope Benedict, who was sitting in the Vatican, then took a question for Maria Teresa, whose son Francesco is in a vegetative state. She wanted to know if Francesco's soul had left him.
His soul is still present in his body. It's like a guitar whose strings have been broken. He feels the presence of your love.
Santo Padre, secondo lei,
Later in the pre-recorded programme, these students in Baghdad asked about the persecution of Christians. Pope Benedict this time spoke of the need for reconciliation and understanding. Again without notes, though it's believed he was shown the questions before the programme. The studio audience watched as a total of 7 questions were asked. There was no opportunity for follow-ups, though the Pope's answers were comprehensive. But more contentious issues, like the priest abuse scandal, were avoided altogether. That's why some critics have called the programme sanitised. But the Vatican says this was all about making Pope Benedict a little more open and accountable to everyday people with ordinary concerns, something neither this pontiff or any other one has ever done on television before. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, at the Vatican.
Now, with just a week to go before next Friday's royal wedding, the preparations are in full swing. The occasion is expected to give a bit of a boost to retail and tourism. But for other economic sectors in the UK, the extra public holiday comes with a financial cost. Emma Simpson looks now at the royal wedding winners and losers.
From mugs to replica rings, a bit of bubbly to toast the royal couple, street parties and thousands of extra tourists. But just how much money will all this generate for our economy?
Welcome everybody to the Celebrity Planet Royal Wedding Walking Tour.
Here's one business that's cashing in. London's newest tourist attraction. Retailers are hoping to make the most of it too. The souvenirs and memorabilia racking up an estimated £172 million in sales. Then there are all the celebrations, another 157 million. And all the extra tourists could generate a further £62 million.
There are certainly an awful lot of people who are hoping to make money out of this royal wedding, and some parts of the economy are going to get a welcome boost, but there are an awful lot of businesses who think they're going to lose out.
The boss of this sign-making company in Liverpool says she can ill afford to give yet another paid bank holiday to her staff. As the big day draws near, there will be winners and losers, but we'll have to wait long after the honeymoon to find out if the economic benefits outweigh the costs. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
And remember, if you're interested in the royal wedding, there is much more on the build-up to the big day on our website, including a look at what is the most appropriate outfit for a wedding. You can also take a look at the history of royal weddings. It's all there on the BBC website, waiting for you to pay a visit. And that is all from the programme. World Have Your Say Extra is up next. But from me, Zeinab Badawi, and the rest of the World News Today team, goodbye and enjoy your weekend.
Hello. There's some unsettled weather on the way for the northwest of Africa. Both Morocco and northern Algeria are likely to see some strong winds and some heavy rain at times during Saturday and probably into Sunday as well. Showers, meanwhile, through the central belt, we'd expect to see those, but extending down through Angola, Botswana and into South Africa. Paris starting to see showers. It's been very warm here recently. We keep the warmth, but the showers break out. Rome turning rather cloudy. Madrid fairly cool and showery at times. A little bit of rain for Moscow. Expect showers too in Riyadh through Sunday and Monday. High temperatures in Muscat, 41 degrees. Low 30s for Jeddah and for Aden. For Tokyo, some fine weather for a time before rain returns on Monday. Fine throughout the next couple of days in Hong Kong, but looking wetter, I think, for Beijing by Monday. Bye-bye.
We found a city where no one is a stranger. A city that gave us a million reasons to return. Experiences to share, moments to cherish, and discoveries to uncover. Pure smiles, charming style, and happiness to share. A journey for the soul. We found it all in a world of smiles. The city of happiness. Hangzhou, China.
Join us for a selection of some of our best reports of the week from the BBC's network of correspondents right around the world. That's Reporters with me, Zeinab Badawi, every weekend here on BBC World News.
This week in our full-length edition of Talking Movies, Robert Pattinson branching out from his vampire role. Robert Redford's historical drama The Conspirator. Elton John opens the Tribeca Film Festival, plus a celebration from the world of silent film. Join me, Tom Brooke, here on BBC World News.
Now, BBC World News viewers can join the multimedia phone-in programme broadcast alongside BBC World Service Radio and BBC Online and share your views on topical issues of the day with a global audience. World Have Your Say.
Hello, I'm Roz, welcome to World Have Your Say Extra. Well, earlier on BBC World News, we discussed whether the so-called Arab Spring is losing its momentum. And as ever, we got lots and lots of calls, and we're going to speak to some more of you right now. Well, it's not just calls we receive, but lots of messages as well. Let's pull up one from Rabin Nasser on Twitter saying the rising death toll in Syria suggests the regime has reached a level of desperation not unlike that seen in Mubarak's final days. Well, let's also bring in Anas, who's a Syrian blogger in Boston. Anas, do you agree with that?
Yes, just looking at how things have been evolving the past 2 days, the regime appears as if they declared war on the people and on the protesters, basically.
And do you have concerns for what's happening now, or do you believe the protesters can look after themselves, can drive through their cause?
I think they're being faced with unprecedented levels of violence. I'm really worried, and there have been dozens of people killed today, and I think it's the way things are shaping up, it could get a lot uglier.
Anas, thanks for speaking to us from Boston. Let's pull up an email from Shadi Aleppo in Syria saying President Assad started the reform process. Remember, he's ended those emergency laws introduced in the early 60s. Shadi goes on, but the protesters do not care. They only want regime change. OK, well, let's shift from Syria to George. He's from DR Congo, but he called us from Venezuela. George, what's your comment?
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Anyway, I just want to talk normally about the NATO role around the world. I think it will be a time where NATO has to try to stop playing after the wall of Berlin falling role, because NATO is doing the very, very bad things around there in Libya.
But George, you're criticising NATO and you're saying since the fall of the Berlin Wall, NATO's role has really been removed and it doesn't have a role anymore. But wouldn't you like to see NATO intervene in Misrata and try and prevent more killings of civilians?
I think in this conflict, we need to see people sitting around the table and talk about the case peacefully. Because actually bombing is not going to bring any change. What they are doing in Afghanistan is the same. They want to bring the drone plane. The drone plane have been killing people in Pakistan.
All right, so George, your point is that more war or more military action will beget more military conflict. You're not convinced by NATO's tactics. Thanks for getting in touch with World Have Your Say. OK, another comment to pull up on the Syria comment website, because we don't just look at World Have Your Say's websites, we look far and wide for what you're thinking about. Addendum writes, if the revolution had had a leadership, that leadership would have been arrested a very long time ago and the revolution beheaded. It is precisely because the revolution doesn't have a leadership that it has been able to survive. It's the same in Tunisia and Egypt. And Addendum makes the point that lots of you have made, that really the strength of Egypt's protest was that there wasn't a single leader for the authorities to focus on. OK, well, let's shift from that comment in Syria to Andre, who's from the Netherlands, but speaking to us on the phone from Georgia. Andre, what part of the Arab Spring would you like to comment on?
Yeah, I think that the momentum they have lost, because I have the feeling that they are protesting because it's very fashionable to protest. I think the first step was good, but from then on, they must start to build the country, and it can only be happened in a democratic way by parliament with laws, and build up the country in a democratic way with new laws, with a new situation. So I think only protesting gives nothing.
Thank you for your comment, Andre. We appreciate you getting in touch from Georgia. Here's another message from Ali in Italy saying, what's really preventing the UN sending its troops into Syria to help the citizens that are being killed every day? Well, there appears to be no appetite at the moment for the UN to sanction intervention as it has done in Libya. But you never know, more people are calling for that as time goes by. Here's a message that Nama in Damascus has sent to the BBC saying, I assert that there is a foreign conspiracy to make riots in Syria. That's something I heard from a political analyst in Damascus just an hour ago on BBC Radio, saying we're ready, and Nama continues saying we're ready to face our enemy, and by that he means the protesters. And Gambito 101 tweets us saying, I think the US using drones to fight the pro-Gaddafi forces is a welcome idea. Gaddafi's a monster and should be taken down. Now, let me pull up another message from Daniel. He's posted on Facebook.com. By the way, if you're watching and want to get involved in World Have Your Say's conversation, go to Facebook.com/World Have Your Say, click the like button. Daniel says, you can't win a war based on drones. Ground operations is a must, and that should be imported from overseas. And really, that issue has been argued again and again and again. It's just not going away with reference to the situation in Libya. Last caller now, John in St Lucia called us here at BBC World News. John, what's your comment?
Well, exactly about what? The drones, or is that what you're asking me about? The drones? I think they're a good idea. I think something needs definitely to be done.
So you're quite happy to see the situation escalated, the military intervention escalated. John, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Let's pull up one more slider email here from Santa on Facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Drones don't have a good reputation. However, Gaddafi must go. NATO must step up the pressure and relieve the autocrat, even if it means some innocent lives. And that is really a discussion we've had before and we'll have again here on World Have Your Say, whether it is worth risking the deaths of some innocents in Libya in exchange for Colonel Gaddafi going. We'll have to turn our attention to that maybe on BBC Radio next week. I'll be back with you live on BBC World Service Radio, 17 hours GMT on Monday. Speak to you next week here on BBC World News. Goodbye.
It doesn't work that way. Do you discount that completely, or is there something in there?
I take your point. There are great dangers.
I wonder how one would know whether it's a success or failure.
You will have these kind of teething problems. We have to be patient.
Repression is still a possibility.
Yes.
Join me, Gavin Esler, for Dateline London every weekend on BBC World News.
It was here in downtown Cairo that the revolution took shape and gathered momentum. And women were there to make it happen. But as the new Egypt unfolds, will their struggle for rights be forgotten?
I'm Paddy O'Connell from Weekend World. On the programme this week, Robert Redford on the plot to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. That's his latest film. The secrets of vanishing Antarctica. And a BBC manager on criticism of coverage of the UK royal wedding. That's all on Weekend World.
Now, a lively review of your comments on BBC World News programmes and a brief snapshot of what's coming up. Weekend World.
Hello and welcome to Weekend World. I'm Paddy O'Connell, a programme in which there is absolutely no mention today of Britain's royal wedding. Around the world this weekend, the new film about the plot to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. Robert Redford talks about the movie.
We are still fascinated with Lincoln and his assassination.
The Doha debates on whether the Libya problem should be for Arabs to sort out.
There's no time to hold on. There's no time to hold on. Let me finish. This is a new era. This is a new era. Revolutions happened in weeks. Okay.
And vanishing Antarctica, what it might mean for the rest of the world.
There's brass monkeys out there.
So let's start with the countdown to the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton in the UK. I have to admit to a certain amount of economy with the truth in telling you that we wouldn't be covering this topic, because either you will be feeling the thrill of anticipation about the upcoming nuptials, or you will be about to propel yourself from your sofa at the screen. A full roundup of your views in just a moment, but first here's a selection of the nuptial nuggets headed in your direction.
They're nearly done, sorry.
Let's go back to the start of this story, to County Durham and to some of the future Queen's cousins.
620 change. Thank you very much indeed.
This is Peter Beadle, who runs that most British of establishments, a fish and chip shop. As cousin Kate enjoys her wedding reception at the palace, Pete will be frying up his own wedding feast.
An extra large Prince of Wales cod. I'd love them to pop in, yeah. If they come to visit the northeast of England, which I'm sure they will, they're more than welcome to come in and try the Relations fish and chips.
Lord knows I need some now.
I hope they have a nice day. I don't really know them.
You're not playing though?
I'll do the gig if they ask, yeah. But the thing that surprises me about in England is that there's so many people who are rude about the royal family all the time. Not even the Sex Pistols, like everybody, and then as soon as there's a wedding, everybody seems to like suddenly become a royalist, you know, which is very interesting.
Well, comments from viewers around the world have arrived like confetti over a beautiful bride. Yanis from Greece was in a minority. We would like to see even more on the royal wedding. Congratulations to the BBC for taking this opportunity to cover the subject of marriage generally from a global perspective. Jackie from South Africa had a more widely held view. I really do not care and will not watch. Royalty should be banned. There are far more important events. That day I will be watching the Cartoon Network. Anything but the wedding. Well, the Cartoon Network is very good viewing, I agree, but do bear with me, there are other views to get in. For instance, Sjoerd from the Netherlands. I have no interest whatsoever in the royal family, nor in their relationships, not the English royals, nor the Dutch ones, nor any other for that matter. Well, you've left the French off your list, and they had a solution to their royal family. La guillotine. Let's hear from Ella in that country, who seems to be slightly wistful. I feel sorry for all those people who have no time for the monarchy. However, David from Hong Kong let us have it with both barrels. It seems that most of the media, not just the BBC, has become completely unhinged when it comes to coverage of the run-up to the forthcoming royal wedding. And with me to respond to some of those comments is our very own minor royal, Jamie Angus, who runs the BBC World Newsroom. Thank you for coming, Jamie.
Thanks for having me, Paddy.
Is it true that you are partly an architect of the royal coverage?
It is true, I'm afraid.
So are you unhinged?
Sadly not. I think it's been very difficult to strike the right balance with the royal coverage. And throughout, we've been mindful this is a story that really divides audiences. Some sections of the audience are really interested in this story, but another quite large section of the audience is completely disinterested in this story, and they don't particularly want to see any coverage of it at all. So it's been quite difficult for us to plot a middle way, if you like, through that particular thicket.
Thicket, yes. I mean, it's a royal thicket. I mean, you say divided. As I look at the opinion, it appears to be slanted against it. Around the world, people are saying, you know, cool down. Is that true, Giselle?
Personally, I don't think that's true. Interestingly, I was travelling for business the other week, and I was in Canada, and the appetite for the royal wedding there is enormous. And similarly, when people come back to the newsroom and I ask them, how's it looking in the country where you've just been? So I was talking to colleagues who've been in Australia and elsewhere in the Far East. There is enormous appetite for the royal wedding, and you only need to look at how much the American networks, for example, have deployed to London in huge numbers, as you'll see if you go down to central London this afternoon. you know that the appetite in a lot of these regions is really big.
You mentioned that the Americans are flocking in. I mean, if they're putting so much coverage our way, what will BBC do differently?
Well, I think the tone from the BBC will be very different. We're an organisation that covers the royal family year in, year out, and we understand the part that they play in our national life and around the world. But I think generally the BBC's coverage has a different tone to the Americans because it is less obsessed with the novelty and celebrity of royal weddings, because that's something we're a bit more used to.
And to be fair, some viewers are anxiously anticipating. We have heard from Simon in Sweden. I think he even made his own film saying how much he was looking forward to it. Will you be there with a sleeping bag overnight and a small stove?
I'll tell you where I will be with my sleeping bag, and that's in the control room of the BBC World News channel, watching the output. That's as close as I'm going to get, unfortunately. But the main thing that's keeping me up at nights and worrying me about the wedding is if there's a very big breaking news story on the day, because that would be a situation where we'd have to take some difficult decisions about when to cut away from the wedding and to do the news, which is, after all, the primary purpose of the channel. So I'll be hoping for a quiet, happy and peaceful and enjoyable day for everyone involved and on all fronts.
Jamie, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we want to thank you as well for all the comments that you send that frankly keep this programme on the air. You can join the debate, especially if it gives us an opportunity to harangue a BBC manager. We always enjoy that. Contact us via our viewers' online forum at bbcglobalminds.com. Now, from conversation online to discussion over the airwaves. The Doha debates are back and a lively session is at hand. The motion is, this House believes that Arabs, not NATO, should be dealing with Libya.
First, I just want to say the issue of why we're calling our brothers, because we are brothers. And then the West, you know, it's very wrong to dehumanize the West. It's wrong. You don't like to be dehumanized. These are... I think it's very, very important to understand that the West or the East, we are all human. It's a human rights issue.
Well, I'm going to bring I fully agree. I mean, that one shouldn't, demonize it, and that not at all. And I myself thanked the West and NATO for intervening, and if others were not willing to do so. But to my mind, it's very clear that we have an interest. We in this region, like other peoples in other regions, have an interest in building a regional order where we take responsibility first for fires that take place in our region.
The Doha debates on the very topical subject of Libya. If you're in Tripoli and you'd like to watch that discussion, it's on at 11:10 on Saturday morning, with other times across the weekend. Coming up on Weekend World, actor Michael Sheen goes back to his hometown in Wales. And we uncover the secrets of Antarctica. First, let's find out what Talking Movies is up to, and here's our usherette-in-chief, Tom Brooke.
Well, Paddy, we've got an action-packed edition of Talking Movies in store for you this weekend. We'll be hearing from Robert Pattinson, who is, of course, the star of the Twilight film series. He'll be telling us about his new film, which is a romantic drama in which he appears starring opposite Reese Witherspoon. We'll also be hearing from Robert De Niro. His Tribeca Film Festival is now celebrating its 10th anniversary. And we'll be featuring a report put together by my colleague Manoush Zamarodi on The Conspirator, which is a new historical drama from Robert Redford.
It's a standard history lesson in the U.S. The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in 1865, just as the Civil War was drawing to a close. Lincoln was shot in the head while attending the theater. The culprit was John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer who was against abolishing slavery.
Lincoln's been shot.
One bullet may have killed our beloved president, but not one man!
But Robert Redford's new film, The Conspirator, isn't just a retelling of the first assassination of a U.S. president. It's the very little-known story of Mary Surratt, the only woman charged as a conspirator in Lincoln's murder.
For me, the reason for making the film was that it was a story that nobody knew about, around an event that everyone knew about. I mean, everyone in this country has heard about Lincoln. Lincoln is one of the most exhausted topics in this country, but it still goes on. We are still fascinated with Lincoln and his assassination and who he was as a man, and the injustice of that assassination. So that territory, when I first got the script, I thought, well, that's not something I'm going to be interested in, because we know about that. In other words, it's been well covered by books and films and documentaries and so on. But then when I read it, I thought, wait a minute, this is very interesting because this is attached to that, but it's a story that no one knows about.
Whose side are you on?
Trying to defend you.
By suggesting I trade my son for myself? You're trying to save you, Mr. Reagan.
Robert Redford and his new movie, The Conspirator. If you're in New York, Talking Movies will be screened at 3:30 on Sunday afternoon, with other showings as well. Now, if Robert Redford wasn't enough for you, we've another top-flight actor for you as well, Michael Sheen. Perhaps best known around the world for playing the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, he's been back to his hometown in Wales, in part to stage a play, but also to sing the praises of Port Talbot in this 1 square mile. Port Talbot is a centre for heavy industry with a skyline to match, and Sheen has chosen it as the setting for a modern version of a traditional Christian religious play he is directing, known as The Passion.
Part of this project has been to try and say to people, no, your story matters, that what you have to say and your experience and your lives really matter, and there's an extraordinary story to be told about this place, and to feel empowered by that, and that if a story that is as sort of epic and as monumental as the story of the Passion could take place in this town, then maybe that sort of shows that there are miracles happening in this town every day, which there are.
Next, to a fascinating programme about Antarctica and the way that it's being affected by rising global temperatures. Now, it comes as part of our World series, and reporter Richard Wilson, who's travelled there 6 times, returns to meet scientists to ask what the impact will be for the rest of us of some disturbing changes to the ice pack.
I've been coming here as a TV correspondent since the mid-1990s. It's interesting to reflect that back then it was thought that the sort of changes we're seeing here wouldn't happen until the time of my grandchildren, or maybe sometime long after that. And yet it's happening now, and it's happening much faster than was thought possible. Well, wow, that's just incredible.
The glacier isn't a stationary thing. It's constantly moving towards the sea. And this really sort of shows you that, because we're in one of those fractures, so it's opened up as it's been moving. And when it's a very quiet day, you can hear the sort of very deep cracks and groans, and especially as they reach to the sea, and you hear a very loud gunshot-style crack, and that says it's falling off. So, I mean, that really is sort of another one of the senses that says, OK, this is really moving, and it's moving quite fast.
I'm pleased to say that Richard Wilson is now back in London, apparently with no signs of frostbite. Richard, thank you for coming. I mean, beyond the extraordinary science, there must be some extraordinary practicalities of working in such a hostile environment.
Yeah, I mean, travel is extraordinary. You're dependent on small aircraft fitted with skis. You're travelling out to glaciers, landing in places where no one's ever landed a plane before, which can be downright hair-raising.
How is it done, then?
Terrifying. Well, they fly along the surface of the ice, training the skis, and take off, fly round, look at the tracks, make sure there are no holes, because holes are crevasses, and that's extremely dangerous. They then repeat the process, fly round. If there are still no holes, they land. And, of course, your heart is in your mouth at this point, because, you know, it might be the 3rd time that opens up the crevasse. And they land in the first third of those tracks, because you need the second 2/3 to take off when you leave. So if you overshoot, you're also in trouble.
I mean, if you then, heaven for help, you get out of the plane, what happens next? Where do you go next as you left the plane?
You stay very close to the plane. There's what's called a field assistant with you, has a long pole, and he marks out a 10-metre square around the plane that's crevasse-free, and you stay strictly within the confines of that space.
Because snow can cover a deep gulf, which is known as a crevasse.
That's right, and you put 1 foot on it, and you're straight through, and that's the last anybody ever sees from you, because the ice in some of these places is hundreds of metres thick.
And what about food, Richard?
Food's interesting, especially for the deep field parties. Here we are in the 21st century, and they send them out with boxes labelled man food. Sounds a bit like sort of beer and crisps and everything you need for a night in front of the telly. Especially odd because, of course, you know, 1/3 of the people down there now are women. They're labelled man food because until the 90s they had dogs down there. So the deep field parties had to have dog food and they had to have man food, and it was really important that they didn't confuse the two. So man food, we still have man food.
Richard Wilson, thank you very much indeed. And if you'd like to see that programme, we're giving you plenty of time to wrap up well, because it's on in 2 weeks. That's May the 1st. And you can find local broadcast times for all of our programmes in a very obvious place, at bbcworldnews.com/schedules. We're not here next week. Guess why? I dropped my clipboard on my tea then. But don't worry, the wedding will go ahead without any slips. Let me leave you instead with some more remarkable pictures from Antarctica. Goodbye.
Who is going to feed the world? Who will move those billions of people around? And how will we clear up after them?
I'm Adam Shaw, and I'm on a journey right across the world, meeting the people and companies, finding the major business solutions to the challenges facing us all over the next 10 years.
As we look to the future, where will business take us? Horizons, coming soon on BBC World News.
World Challenge, in association with Shell.
BBC World News Competition for Sustainable Enterprise is back for its 7th year. And this is your chance to nominate a business or project for World Challenge 2011. Projects like Chumbe Island Coral Park, a finalist in last year's competition. Visiting Tanzania 2 decades ago, Sybil Riedmiller was shocked by the destruction of the country's coral reefs.
I witnessed dynamite fishing every day, coral reefs being blasted to pieces. And it was impossible at that time to actually make a government interested in this issue. I came up with the idea of a marine park, which is funded by tourists, but would provide free education for local people, both fishers and school children.
From today, I get knowledge in how importance of coral reef, where coral reef is found. I think it's good today.
World Challenge 2011 is looking for more great initiatives. Make your nomination at theworldchallenge.co.uk, where you'll also find a wealth of information on past finalists and the sustainable development community worldwide. This year, we're getting down to business. The BBC's Code of Conduct for competitions and voting is at bbc.com/competition code.
World Challenge, in association with Shell.
A handful of banks are large enough to rock Britain's economy. That's what we saw in 2008, and that's what no government ever wants to see again. My guest today on Hard Talk is Martin Wolf, a member of the UK's Independent Banking Commission. How can the system be made safer without stifling business and driving the banking industry abroad?
On Peshar's Business People Asia, a royal wedding special. Meet Reshma Islam, a pioneer designer of Asian bridal wear. We take you inside the bridal business with me, Michael Peshard, here on BBC World News.
With one of the biggest events on the international calendar fast approaching, we'll bring you the inside story on all the preparations and talk to some of the people lucky enough to get an invitation.
I'm very proud to be part of this special day.
Royal Wedding Report every weekend until the big day on BBC World News, home of the British Royal Wedding.